Let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
We're doing it to help our country, and our country was riddled with fat, like no country probably anywhere in the world, and we're getting rid of the fat.
There it is, the President of the United States, Doge, operation yielding great results, and protests from Dems as cabinet turmoil has subsided. Remember 2 weeks ago? Now everything's clarified. It's going to be secretaries and then Doge, but attacks on Tesla pick up steam. Is the juice worth the squeeze? For me, absolutely.
Number 2.
There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act.
First of all, it's ridiculous. It's just another example of a radical judge saying something that's just disgusting. To compare anything to the Nazis, the Holocaust, we follow the law.
Idiot. Judge Patricia Millett weighing in, and through one of 3 judges weighing in on the legality of shipping 269 ISIS and MS-13 gang members to El Salvador. The judge fares in full stride as the Trump team's efforts to deport more criminal aliens. The fate of the fight's now in an appeals court in front of those 3 judges. We look at the case and how politics has infected the justice system.
Number 1.
Goldberg, the Atlantic editor's phone number, was somehow added to a contact card by one of the staffers that was invited to this Signal group chat. Mike Waltz says he's never spoken to Goldberg and that they've never even met.
So, top secret communications with top officials in the Trump administration leaked to Atlantic magazine writer after he was accidentally looped into a Signal, that's his encrypted app text chain. Exposed the lead up to the aftermath of the Houthi attack last weekend. Not the attack on us, our attack on them. We look at the fallout. And Kayleigh, we've been going over this on Fox and Friends. We're just putting this story together. First, we found out the Signal app is used and allowed in government. And that's something different from when you were there, right?
Yeah, that's a protocol that Peter Doocy read out to us. I did not use the Signal app. Whether others did, who knows?
Biden's did, evidently.
The Bidens did, evidently. So, it is certainly more secure than text message. But, that was news to me to learn that today. It is an interesting story. We'll follow it. And, there's going to be a ton of questions today, Brian, at this hearing. It was definitely a mistake. But I think the big picture here, the Houthi strike went off without a hitch. And, we're here today, and they need to figure out a protocol going forward. You got to check who's on that 18-person text chain.
I wonder if Jeff Goldberg does this if he gets looped into a Biden text chain. I wonder if he still writes the story.
No, he does not. Breaking news. No, Jeffrey Goldberg would not post this. Other reporters with integrity would, but I have experience with Jeffrey Goldberg. He's the one who did the suckers and losers story.
What do you mean by suckers and losers when they...
So this was when he alleged President Trump called our fallen heroes suckers and losers. I never heard President Trump speak that way. Immediately was able to gather more than a dozen sources who disputed the story by Jeffrey Goldberg. But the reason I know this guy does not act in good faith is because he never even came to me with the story. It came through a deputy of mine who, an hour before the story posted, got wind of it. That's not how most reporters operate. Most reporters give you ample chance to respond. Not Jeffrey Goldberg. This guy's a hit-and-run reporter. It is correct that this was an authentic chain that's been confirmed by the administration, but Goldberg said war plans were transmitted, but he doesn't give evidence of that. He doesn't give details of that. So the question remains, what exactly did...
Is that a responsible thing to do, maybe?
He claims he's being responsible by not sharing operational details. Okay. But forgive us, Jeffrey Goldberg, for not trusting you to characterize what you saw in the most accurate of fashions, because you certainly did not do that when I was the press secretary.
So here is Jeffrey Goldberg saying how he got it. Evidently, he was shocked to see himself included on this list. Michael Waltz has since communicated. I talked to him. He said, I've never met him. I don't know him. I have no idea how he ended up on the list. So when you do Signal, we've learned this. I have Signal. I don't use it much. Your initials pop up. So say KM, BK with me, it would pop up. So when everybody's on there, Tulsi Gabbard and Michael Waltz and Secretary Hegseth and Vice President Vance, and it goes pretty deep with John Radcliffe and others. When you talk, when you're up there, your initials are up there. So his point points it up there. So people would say, well, when JG popped up, why didn't someone say, who is that? And it turns out that our trade representative, whose name's eluding me right now, Jameson Greer, he would be those same initials. So maybe people thought Trade was a topic because they talked about, do we need to bomb with that waterway? How much trade is really at stake? So they let it go. And that's when he said, I thought it was disinformation. Here's what he said to put it in perspective, what it was like for him. Cut 3.
There have been a lot of breaches. There's been a lot of leaks. There's been a lot of stolen, cases of stolen documents. I've never seen a large group of senior-most national security officials just kind of willy-nilly put out a bunch of stuff, without knowing who they're talking to.
So he says he's seen a lot of breaches, he's seen a lot of leaks, but he's stolen documents, but he's never seen something like this.
Yeah, look, I mean, again, a huge mistake. Jamison Greer, that would make sense to me, that you'd see that. You'd assume it's your trade representative. But I think there's something to be learned going forward here. Yeah, Signal may be more secure. It's an encrypted way of communicating. But is it really more secure if you're communicating with initials and you don't know who the initials are? There has to be a way moving forward to verify who is on this text chain. I used just iMessage when I was in government, using my government device. You'd get a group text message. The first thing I would do, very first thing, who's on this group message? The second thing I would do would then communicate in the appropriate fashion with said members of the group. You have to have a way to do that because you can't go by initials. So I'm wondering right now, is the chief of staff's office sitting around huddling?
She was on, Susan Wiles was on this too.
She was on it. How can we make sure going forward that all of the initials are not the initials of outside actors, but the initials of people within the administration? A simple fix, I assume, but one that is badly needed.
So just to put together the story, this is what Jeffrey Goldberg writes. He says, I was on a message from a group chat from Michael Waltz, and it read as follows, quote, team establishing a principals group for coordination on Houthis, particularly for over the next 72 hours. My deputy, Alex Wong, is pulling together a Tiger team as deputies, agencies, and chief of staff level following up from the meeting to the Situation Room this morning for action items, and we'll be sending that for later this evening. So is it Alex Wong that possibly pulled this together? Because as Michael Waltz said, I never met this guy. I don't know. I don't have him on my contacts. So you have contacts, I have contacts. When it comes to say the Signal, I only have like 4. I kind of forgot I had it after a while because someone told me to get it because it's so secure. So I'm not carrying over my contacts. So if he got a government phone, and you just educate me on this, Kayleigh, they come in and they say, congratulations, you're the press secretary. They give you a government phone, right? Do they?
They do.
Okay. Do they say to you, I'm putting contacts on there? Or is it up to Kayleigh McEnany to put her contacts on?
It was up to me to add the contacts. And the government phone operates in a pretty strange way. There's a ton you cannot do with it. I'm trying to remember exact details, but I know like some social media apps that I would communicate on as @PressSec. There were limitations that wouldn't be on my personal device. So there's all kinds of built-in limitations on the government device to protect you. So I always assume this is the safest way to communicate. Signal was not on there. Whether that changed, who knows? But obviously something went wrong and that needs to be fixed. And there's going to be a ton of questions today. But Jeffrey Goldberg, I mean, Brian, it's kind of like out of House of Cards. I mean, how does the worst reporter in all of Washington for the Trump administration get added to the chain? I think,
and he's idealistic. He's an ideologue. Is it what you're saying?
He's an ideologue. Yeah, I think it's generous calling him a reporter. I mean, he hates the Trump administration. That's my opinion from what I've observed from the outside. Don't know what's in his heart. But this guy, I mean, both of his main reports on the Trump administration, the one I was privy to, debunked by a dozen sources. The second one with Vanessa Julian that we talked about on Fox and Friends during the election, debunked by Ben Williamson, debunked by Mark Meadows. So this is a guy who has an agenda, in my personal opinion.
So, Kayleigh, the one thing I talked to a person, I was communicating with somebody close to the president, Michael Waltz's job is not in jeopardy. But wants to straighten it out, don't happen again, it's a mistake. And they were very disappointed that The Atlantic got this because they hate The Atlantic. It revitalized what he thought was a dead magazine.
Yeah, of all places. And now Jeffrey Goldberg can go on some rehabilitation tour of his image with new reporting. Michael Waltz seems like a great guy. People make mistakes. And, as I mentioned to you on Fox and Friends, my dad said when you eat crow, you got to eat it when it's hot. And they did that. At the National Security Council, Michael Waltz handled this the exact way. He's ahead of the comms team there. They said, we're not denying the authenticity of these messages. He did not try to deny it. He owned the mistake. And I think the next step is for him to come do an interview, lay it out exactly what happened, just as they were forthright in responding to this reporter. And Jeffrey Goldberg admitted that. I watched Jeffrey Goldberg say last night, the press shop handled this in a way that I thought was very professional. I'm sure that was hard for Jeffrey Goldberg to say. But the next step is Michael Waltz doing an interview, clearing it up, and what changes are going to be made moving forward.
So here's what Leon Panetta said, former Secretary of State, Chief of Staff, Secretary of Defense too, cut 7.
There's no question this is legitimate, but what they're not paying attention to is that you've included somebody on the outside who has no business knowing about this information. There was a mistake here. Somebody on the Atlantic got the most sensitive emails you can imagine at the federal level. That is a serious blunder. It has to be investigated, and somebody, frankly, needs to get fired.
Who do you think that is, sir?
Whoever put that chain together. Somebody put that name on a list, and whoever that was deserves to be fired.
So that's what we're going to hear a lot today as Democrats are dying to sound off about their frustration with the Trump win, the administration, the executive orders, the fact that they're on their heels, the fact that this budget got passed. I believe it's all going to be transferred to an explosive hearing today, don't you?
It is. And I just want to emphasize this administration has been near perfect.
Yeah.
This administration came in ready. This administration came in with 100 executive orders, more than anyone else on day one of the administration. They've done a phenomenal job keeping communications tight. There haven't been leaks. Unlike Trump 1.0, there were a ton of leaks, not this time around. Susie Wiles clearly has a handle on what's going on. So this is an unforced error. We're 2 months in. Everyone's going to make mistakes. But to your point, I think it's a really good one. Jeffrey Goldberg, would he have reported this with Biden? No. So the level of scrutiny here for this administration, you have a bunch of reporters sitting there waiting, hitting their pens against the desk for the first mistake. Something they didn't do for Biden. He was always given the benefit of the doubt. I would love to see what was going on in his signal messages if a reporter was ever added, but I don't think we'd be privy to that knowledge. Would have been buried. They would have moved on. It's the leftist media.
Can we talk to something, your opinion now, you can do it, about with all your knowledge of foreign policy? It was interesting to see the vice president in this case push back, saying essentially, you shouldn't do this. Only 3% of our commerce goes through there. Europe has 40%. Why are we doing this? The public isn't going to understand it. He also says the president, it goes against what the president's trying to say, and that Europe, you got to step up and defend yourselves. How do you feel? And then Pete Hegseth acknowledges it and then says, but we're still doing it. And then Stephen Miller puts a stop to it. Instead of saying they were thinking about going back to the president with this. He could stop at any moment. And Stephen Miller puts a stop to it. The president already made a decision. Yeah. We're going through with this. How does that sound to you? Does this sound unique?
It does sound unique. I was fascinated. To me, and we haven't talked about this, this was the most fascinating part of all of this. J.D. Vance has a very clear view of foreign policy. He clearly disagreed with the president to the point of saying at some point, I don't have the exact language, but it was something to the effect of, I'm not sure the president is aware of how inconsistent this is with his message. So J.D. Vance pushing hard in this huge group of 18 people against the president and his view on it. And Stephen Miller shuts it down. As I heard, the president was clear, green light. So Stephen Miller shuts it down. It's interesting.
He didn't say a word, and then he just boom.
Yeah. And I had limited interaction with Vice President Pence on, COVID issues, for example. He always seemed to be on the same page with President Trump. I never in my meetings saw him, come back on COVID and be like, oh, the president's kind of wrong on this. So it was interesting to hear J.D. Vance be so robust in his opinion. Obviously, Pence and Trump had that falling out at the end, but in general, they tended to be in lockstep, at least in front of me. And it was interesting to see J.D. Vance kind of pushing back on a policy issue.
Here it is, says, I'm not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. This is a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself, but there's a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why it matters, and seeing where the economy is, etc. So a couple of things. What's not mentioned here, and believe me, I'm not saying I know more than them, but the message to Iran. They're being thoroughly financed by Iran. They have shut down, they've hit our destroyer 72 times. 3%, but they hit us 72 times over the last 3 years. The Houthi rebels have barely a response to trying to hit us with different drone strikes. Number two, they've been rocketing Israel. Are they an ally? I'm pretty sure they are. Isn't that a good message? We're hitting you wherever it is. You got 2 months to get rid of your nuclear program. You're going to stop harassing people in the open seas. And Israel, you're going to get busy. We got your back.
And Pete Hegseth made that case on the text chain. He made the case, much of what you're making. But, J.D. Vance has a very populist view of the world and foreign policy, kind of America first. Doesn't mean America alone was our motto, but it kind of, for him, America first, America alone seems to be the motto. But what was interesting is, I'm sure Vice President Pence had private disagreements with President Trump behind the scenes. But for J.D. Vance to do it openly on an 18-person text chain, it was really, really interesting to see.
Kayleigh McEnany, we'll hear more about this on Outnumbered. We'll see this where the story is at noon. Back in a moment.
See you, Brian.
We take a look at the fallout now with Steve Hilton. Steve, so we know about a text chain. Everything was authentic. We don't know about the battle plan because Peter Goldberg did not put that in there. Your thoughts about the fallout and what your takeaway is?
This is the risk that you run when you communicate by smartphone. It takes me back to the very first days when I was working in 10 Downing Street and we had a security briefing. And they were very clear about it, that whatever app you use or system you use or the encryption or whatever, foreign adversaries can get into smartphones. They can take over your smartphone even when it's not on and turn it into a listening device. In fact, the advice was if you really want to be safe and secure, then you shouldn't have a smartphone at all. You should have one of these, which is not the best thing for radio, but it's a flip phone, which is what I have. Not for security reasons, just simply because that's my choice. It's actually much more secure. And so I think that's the bigger issue here, that clearly there was this was a screw up, no question, and they've said that, but they've made clear that nothing was compromised in terms of this particular operation. But the real story, I don't think, is about Signal or even this journalist. It's about the fact, just a reminder that using smartphones for everything is not secure.
Well, what about the text chain and the checks and balances on whether someone should be in there? It's very similar to leaving the door open in the Situation Room and letting the janitor hear. And the janitor would eventually call up Atlantic Magazine and write it, right?
Well, we got to find out exactly how that happened and who did that. And it is absolutely clear that it's a mistake. They're not denying that. They're just saying that in this particular case, nothing happened untoward.
So here's Jeffrey Goldberg, who got the story, who really has no credibility with this administration and with many of viewers and readers of the Atlantic Magazine. He's a left-wing columnist. Cut 3.
There have been a lot of breaches. There's been a lot of leaks. There's been a lot of stolen, cases of stolen documents. I've never seen a large group of senior-most national security officials just kind of willy-nilly put out a bunch of stuff, without knowing who they're talking to.
Here's President Trump when asked about this story yesterday afternoon. Cut 5.
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Right. Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it.
So the other thing is about the exchange. Did you read the exchange?
Yes, parts of it, not the whole thing. I've seen.
You see how J.D. Vance was not for it? Are you okay with that?
Look, I mean,
you're supposed to have differing opinions, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a point that's been made, including by Goldberg, I've seen him on other media today making the point that actually the positive here, he said that, Jeffrey Goldberg, is that they're having a robust discussion and they're expressing the same opinions in private as they are in public. And it's good to see that there's a real discussion going on. I mean, so that's what you would want. And Will Cain made that point yesterday, which is that it's actually encouraging that they're having a real conversation about these things rather than just leaving it all up to bureaucrats.
So how do you view, if you're Europe and you see how you were referred to in this exchange, how do you feel about that?
Well, again, it's just it's a wake-up call, but it's not one that I would say President Trump and the administration generally are unhappy for Europe to receive. How long has he said Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defense?
But I'm just saying, it says the account labeled JD Vance responded this: "Team, I'm out for the day, but I think we are making a big mistake." The Vance account goes on to state 3% of the U.S. trade runs through the Suez. 40% of European trade does. This is a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this is the president said to send a message. I'm not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe now. There's a further risk than we see as a moderate to severe spike in prices, but there's a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is. He said, I understand your concerns and fully support it. I think messaging is going to be tough no matter what. And then he says, as I heard, the president was clear, green light, says Stephen Miller.
Stephen Miller,
we
yeah.
soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement on Europe. If Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some further economic gain in return. Your thoughts? Because you're an American now,
Yeah.
but you were born in Europe and now you lived in the UK.
Yeah, and look, there's two conflicting things going on here, which is the role of America as the world's policeman, and whether or not that is a role that has placed too much burden on America without sufficient burden sharing by the rest of the world. It's in all our interests to have a stable world where you don't have rogue terrorist groups or rogue nations just, rampaging around the world, making it a more dangerous place. That's something that is in everybody's interest. The question is who pays for and who delivers the role of being the policeman. And the argument certainly from J.D. Vance is like, we've done way too much of that. And it's our sons and daughters who've lost their lives, and it's our taxpayers who've paid for it, and Europe's been free riding on that. That's a reasonable argument. Now, but then there's another argument which is like, well, no one should be doing this global policeman role and just let each country look after itself. I don't agree with that. I think just as we want law and order in our country, we want law and order around the world. And so I think that conversation about who does it and who pays for it is a legitimate conversation.
Interesting. I think that, again, this is private conversation, never should have been out. It's not like it's a public speech. But that's very consistent with J.D. Vance.
Yes, exactly. He was pretty much saying the same thing at the Munich conference. How do you feel about that speech?
Look, and that tone. Are you comfortable with it? Just you personally?
Yes, I think so. I'm very happy for a little bit of a correction there, honestly. And we had these conversations, and back in the day, I didn't particularly get involved in foreign and security policy. I was mainly involved in domestic policy. The Obama administration was very annoyed. I know for a fact, talking to the former British ambassador here, furious with the Cameron administration back in the day. This is Obama who was annoyed that the Brits were not stepping up in terms of defense spending and so on. So this has been going on a long time. And that conversation that the Obama administration was having behind closed doors, through the diplomatic channels and in those behind closed doors meetings. The difference now is that it's open and public. And when you have a message like this being delivered both by Vance in a speech, but also people can see this is what they really think, I think that it already is prompting Europe to do more. That's a good thing. The argument that the president makes about NATO doing much more, that's the head of NATO agrees with that. That actually it's President Trump, both the first time round and this time round, who has prompted Europe to spend more on defense. So the sum total of defense spending has gone up as a result of this.
All right, Steve, are you going to stay for one or two? You say two?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to come back, talk about California when we come back. Also, the hearings are taking place now. Senator Mark Warner, this is a chance for Democrats to just sound off and vent, because from the election on down, they've had zero momentum. In fact, all they've had was infighting. Now it's time to attack Trump over this decision to include this inadvertent decision to include Jeffrey Goldberg on this text chain. Don't move.
Proposition 47 was actually called the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, ironically.
The reality is it took away consequences for criminal behavior.
It decriminalized hard drugs like heroin and fentanyl and methamphetamine. And then it also reduced the penalties for theft.
We passed that, and the result was a complete free-for-all for crime in the state.
It became common knowledge that you could commit these serial crimes and face no real consequence for it.
Steve Hilton, this is all about his book, and that's a special on Fox Nation that's available on Sunday. It was available since Sunday on the 23rd. It's called CALIFAILURE with Steve Hilton. It's the name of his book. And the special CALIFAILURE with Steve Hilton is available on Fox Nation too. So, Steve, what prompted the writing of this book? I know it prompted your candidacy, the failure in California, but why do you think we should start with a book?
So the thing that I wanted to understand, Brian, is not just what's gone wrong. We know that we can see what a disaster it's been. You can see it in the crime and the homelessness. You can see it in all the people leaving, hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, we're just talking about it in terms of the future congressional districts, the population shift from California to other states. So people are being driven out by the possibility of running a business, the highest housing costs in the country, highest taxes, highest prices for everything, for gas, electricity, you name it, right? So we know those facts. What I wanted to really get to the bottom of is like, why did this happen? How did this happen? And how do we stop it happening in other states? What's the ideology that's driving this? Because if you look at California, basically it's been run by Democrats as one-party rule for nearly 2 decades. This is what you get when Democrats get everything they want.
Illinois too, right?
This is the Democrat plan. Like, this is what they would do if they had complete freedom of operation at the national level. So it's a warning to the rest of the country. And you've got to understand how it happened, the way they took control of the state legislature, they gerrymandered the districts with the union support, all of this, right? They built this machine to have one-party rule, and then they implemented this ideology. And that's what we go through in the book, is like, what are the components of this? It's not just enough to say, well, it's left-wing. What does it really mean? There's the elitism, the cronyism, the corruption with the unions.
Political correctness.
Exactly.
Medi-Cal for all, illegal immigration.
There's so many aspects to it.
All self-inflicted.
All self-inflicted. The climate extremism, I call it climatism, this ideology that you've got to look like you're totally obsessed with
no drilling,
emissions.
Mandated for electric cars. No gas-powered cars are going to be able to come into the state, or trucks.
But when you say no drilling, right? Let's just take that one. It makes no sense, right? Not that long ago, California, we produced 80% of all the oil and gas we use in California, and 20% was imported. Now it's flipped. Okay, so the overall amount that we use has fallen a little bit, not that much. But now, instead of drilling for it in mainly Kern County in California near Bakersfield and producing it with the cleanest production anywhere in the world, we are now importing it on giant super tankers from places like Iraq and Ecuador, spewing out carbon emissions. So in the name of climate change, they are actually increasing carbon emissions to look like they're fighting fossil fuels.
Do you think things can change? Do you think we're at the point now where the Inflation Reduction Act, the new Green Deal that they jammed down our throats, has got such backlash in this election where people might be open to listening to Steve Hilton?
I think so, because you're looking at first of all, look at what happened in November last year in the election. 10 counties flipped from Democrat to Republican, including big ones like Fresno County. Fresno's the 5th biggest city in California, flipped from Democrat blue to red. Wow. 10 counties in total. President Trump, the highest number of votes for any Republican candidate in a generation. He had the highest proportion in San Francisco for like 40 years. You saw, as we were just hearing in the trailer for the CALIFAILURE special, the proposition that Kamala Harris supported when she was state attorney general to basically legalize theft under $950, all these drug offenses, that was mostly reversed in a new ballot initiative, Prop 36 in November. 70% supported that. In every county it was supported. So you're seeing signs of people saying we've had enough. Then you add on to that the fires. in Los Angeles, and the way that highlighted this total catastrophic incompetence and extremism. And I think people are waking up. Now, you just polled just the other day, 50% of Californians would be ready to vote for a Republican governor. 50%.
Wow. So how about this? Crime. How about crime and incompetence? Your best sales tool is the mayor and the governor. She is totally ill-equipped to be effective. She's fallen apart before her eyes, being recalled. And you have a governor that literally thinks it was not he, had nothing to do with the failure to put out those fires, who thinks he's going to listen to a podcast instead of attacking his budget deficit.
It's amazing. And they've bankrupted Medicaid in California. It's called Medi-Cal because they gave health insurance free coverage to illegal immigrants, and they lied about how much that would cost. I mean, last year, they tried to jam through a bill in the state legislature that would take taxpayer money and give it to free down payment assistance for illegal immigrants in California, when most Californians who work so incredibly hard can't afford to buy a house.
And the anti-Semitism on campuses.
Exactly.
So all this stuff, this gives me a great encouragement, especially with your knowledge and your feel for the California people and politics, that you really could do a job, Steve Hilton. You might have Jake Steinfeld as competition or an ally, I'm not sure. Steve, best of luck. Go pick out his book, CALIFAILURE, Reversing the Ruin of America's Worst Run State. Pick it up now.
It's out today. Thank you, Brian.
There's a federal consulting group, which was a group inside of Interior, but it was managing contracts from many different agencies that flowed through here. One of those contracts was to do surveys of individuals, $830 million for surveys. And so part of the question was, hey, could we actually see the surveys? And then the surveys came back, and a survey was like 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with 10 questions that anyone's child in junior high could have put together, or AI could have done for free. $830 million. So that's one that we've stopped. And that contract was going out after you were inaugurated, sir. So it was jumping.
It's a pure fraud.
Yeah.
It's a fraud. But we've had many fraudulent contracts that were caught by the work that Elon and his people are doing, and working with our people. It's been brought to light that the fraud, not just waste and abuse, the fraud has been incredible.
Cabinet meeting yesterday with the Trump team. That was Interior Secretary Burgum, former governor of North Dakota, talking about what they discovered. And now the new system goes, Doge works with inside these units, inside, for example, Interior, inside Defense. But it's going to be the cabinet secretaries that cuts the programs or doesn't cut the programs and personnel, which is fine. I think every state, everybody should have a Doge working for you on some level. I like to see how this is all going to come into bringing the deficit down and fixing up the systems and making everything lean and mean for the first time, maybe in my lifetime. David Bahnsen from the Bahnsen Group is in studio. Also, we're watching the testimony on Capitol Hill among our intel chiefs to talk about the dangers, the most striking dangers facing our country right now. He is the author of Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. David, your thoughts about what Doge has done and statements like Governor Burgum just made.
I love what you said about every state should have a Doge. And I want to point out for listeners, Brian, this is so important. Every business has a Doge. Sometimes it's the mom and pop that run it. They're the Doge because they're keeping an eye on the cash register. They're keeping an eye on the checking account. Some large organizations have other people. But when there's business involved and self-interest, somebody's making sure that there's not money being wasted, fraud, waste, corruption. The whole point of a Doge at government is because there's nobody doing that. There isn't that eyes and ears because there isn't the incentive. It isn't their money. People are not the same about other people's money that they are about their own. So their incentives and their awareness, their knowledge is different in the governmental sector than it is private sector, which is why there are people like us that are believers in a limited government and want more of a private sector because we believe it's more efficient. There's an embedded Doge in every private sector business.
Where's the, so far, how do you feel about the way they're approaching things? I mean, they have a Doge.com, Doge.gov.com. You can see some of the stuff. It's put in an organized way, but it is haphazard. You don't know what is being cut, what is new. Is this really going to count You know, we don't see a tally.
There's been a lot of mistakes, too, and that kind of bothers me a bit. I liked what Governor Mitch Daniels had said about it a couple weeks ago. He's pretty much supportive of what Elon's doing, as I am, but said, I wish that they would talk less, do more. Because I'm telling you, if they did everything they're doing and just didn't say a word, no press, no website, no social media, and then came out in 3 months or 6 months with a list of what they had gotten done, signed, sealed, delivered, it would be so much more effective. Right now, it's a little chaotic, and they like that too. I'm more of a, measure twice, cut once kind of guy. But I think that overall, there's no real great way to do this. Okay, you can't get rid of programs and make everyone happy. I wish that they would do it with a little less chaos because it matches my style and personality. But this lends itself to some chaos.
But David, talk about the hard thing about running your own business, and that's letting people go. And that's what they're doing now. They did this they're doing it with the tens of thousands of people and getting rid of whole programs. And maybe some of these people are good, but you only been there a short period of time, and your goal is to cut down the workforce.
See, I think, Brian, that analogy is a little bit lends itself to a criticism because with a business, if I'm letting people go, there's no way I'm doing it nonchalantly. I want to know who are the biggest liabilities, who are my weakest links, who are my strongest people, and I'm going to my managers and my people to find out who's the right people to let go here, who do we need to keep. I don't think they really went off after quality. They did it kind of just broad-based, and here's a buyout.
So you don't like that? You didn't like that?
I think it could have been done better. And then the reason why I don't like it is I also believe it would have then resonated more with the American people, is you want some political capital here. You want buy-in. Doge was polling 20% more popular when they started than now, and there's no reason for that. But I think part of that has to do with style, and it might be unavoidable because, like you said, no one likes people getting fired.
See, people say on the left and right, they say, I'm part of the Doge committee. I wanted to cut government. I wish they would have cut me in. And I think that's a fundamental problem. Yeah. Because if you put politicians in there, they're elected to have the interest of their people. But the Doge is there for the interest of the country.
But not politicians, though. I'm not talking about elected people. I'm talking about, this was sort of Secretary Rubio's point. I think the cabinet people should have a big say in.
I think they have restructured.
They have.
But see, that's why you can't have a politician in. Even if I'm Republican or Democrat, if you put me in the office and all of a sudden you're going to cut a program that's got a huge building in my district, and people are going to act in their self-interest, you're almost saving them from themselves. Yeah. So they could go, listen, I had nothing to do with this. They didn't factor me in, those damn Republicans. Yeah. Or, you know what? These Doge people did that. The cabinet secretary never called me about this.
The analogy I used on Fox and Friends was I said, and I hate this line because it came from either Lenin or Stalin, but it's a good line, that to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. I just want to know what the omelet is. What is it we're trying to get done here? And then the broken eggs along the way, some people get fired, some budgets get cut, certain things, there's going to be stories. The media is all over this, Brian. They want to share stories of funding not getting to something that, was doing a little bit of good. But see, that's going to happen. You have to cut this stuff overall, and there's no way to do it without some casualties. But I think if you define what you're going for and then have a little more organization on the process, you keep the American people bought in. Because to your point, there's nobody who disagrees that they need to get rid of this and make it more efficient. It's just when you get in the details, it gets harder.
I was stunned to see when you break down what we're spending it on, 7.2% of our budget goes to the interest on the debt that we're spending.
It's very low.
Yeah. But we are spending but the number one factor of our, I guess, would you put as non-discretionary spending?
Mandatory spending is up to 70%. It used to be 30 mandatory, 70 discretionary. It's now 70 mandatory, 30 discretionary. If the American people knew what I just said, they would be stunned. Right. It's the most stunning thing you can say.
Because you're only voting for people to affect the budget, 30% of the budget.
Barely that, because really a lot of the other stuff you can't do much about either.
Right. So how do we fold that out?
And see, here's the thing. There are people, and I'm not one of them, and the Reaganite right is not one of them, that then say national defense becomes on the chopping block. And that's one of the only things I believe is a legitimate function of a federal government, is to protect us. Yeah. So really, if you count, as I do, national defense is mandatory, you have much less than 30% on the chopping block.
Right.
So fraud, waste, and corruption in the effort of Doge becomes a very significant part. And then ultimately, the conversation everyone's trying to avoid, you're going to have to get to the 70, which is entitlements.
So when you see the attacks on Elon Musk's company, Tesla, knowing that he's heading this up, to me, every business person who has got a degree of success that might want to one day work in government might be saying, I got to think twice about it. My motivation is pure, but the country is so polarized. I have to worry about my family. I got to worry about my product. I got to worry about my stock.
Well, and that's been there for some time, that high-profile companies, especially publicly traded ones, are going to have a certain spotlight. This is at a level we've never seen, but Musk has a role we've never seen, too. In fairness, he invited this, but the way they're behaving is over the top. I think if you're going to be a high public figure and say, I want to go work in something as controversial and audacious as Doge, you're taking on some of the controversy, but Elon is a big boy. He can handle it, and he has multiple entities he's turned into centibillionaire companies. I would simply say the problem I have is not that people are mad at Tesla and that they want to have political opinions about it. It's the violence. It's the vandalism. It's the French revolutionary behavior. Dissent in our country does not mean law breaking.
So here is Elon Musk talking about what it means for him and his staff. We met a couple of them the other day on Laura Ingram's show, 30-something-year-old software engineers who give up 6 months to work in the government. Their way of giving back, cut 18.
Just trying to do the right thing for the American taxpayer and for the American people. Just a thank you to the Doge team who are literally getting death threats and being accosted, and these are, a lot of them are just kids. They're just trying to help out, and they're very talented. They could get jobs for millions of dollars a year. Instead, they come here, earn peanuts, and get death threats. So thanks to the Doge team.
It reminds me a little bit, although these guys are 32, they're probably some of the older ones, right? I mean, these are guys that have their whole life in front of them. They're young and talented, and they are doing it with right motives, and this is the thanks they get. I will say Obama's administration did this too to a lot of finance people. After 2008, there were people going back trying to fix AIG, fix Fannie and Freddie, this was complicated financial stuff, and they got demonized for it. And you're right, there's a message in there of no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. David Bahnsen, thanks so much. From the Bahnsen Group, it's going to be an interesting time. We're looking at the market now up slightly, so it's somewhat steady on the tariff talk, as it might not be as pervasive as we thought. Today, we don't know what's going to happen by April 2nd. Thanks so much, David.
Thanks, Brian.
Dan Hoffman joins us now. Dan, first, your take on what we know about the exchanges leading up to the Houthi attack last weekend on the Signal app.
Yeah, it's a bit of a self-inflicted wound. I can tell you that I'm quite sure our foreign adversaries are poring over that story in the Atlantic just to gain insights into how members of the administration engage with one another. You might note that the key role of Stephen Miller, who was texting on behalf of the president and really was the one who gave the operation a green light after there was some back and forth about whether to conduct it. Vice President Vance was pretty critical about Europe paying their fair share in defense. So whatever he said in Munich, wasn't really for show. He really means it. But there are a lot of questions. Is this some sort of standard procedure? Have they done this before? Is there some concern that our foreign adversaries with good technical capability like China or Russia might have penetrated Signal? Special Envoy Stephen Witkoff was in Moscow on 13 March when those text messages were being sent. So was he opening his phone? Was he using his phone, or was he using a burner phone? And that Signal app, I mean, there's just a lot of questions out there. I can just tell you from my experience at CIA, phones aren't safe. We leave them outside of sensitive spaces. You're not allowed to bring them into the CIA or to the DIA or the DNI. We use these SCIFs, the sensitive compartmented information facilities. And I've been in a lot of big meetings like this one that took place to launch that attack on the Houthis. And what we usually do is just join by secure video teleconference. And if you're overseas, it means you go to an embassy. And if you can't make it, you send your deputy. And so it's a tough one, and it's a shame. But as the president said, we learn from it and hopefully move on with some good lessons learned.
And then, of course, you got the timing of all this. I'm sure it's intentional. Jeff Goldberg, now they know. They got all our intelligence chiefs testifying on the dangers facing our country. And the first 15, 20 minutes are all about something that they had nothing to do with. So we'll see what happens. Also, I found it very rich when people like Senator Warner come off so sanctimonious when they really went along with this Russia lark for 2.5, 3 years. And they just watched 4 years of the previous administration without any serious questions, which was probably some of the worst failures that we've had that left us with the messes and the challenges that we have today. I guess you're not usually involved in the political process, but your observations must be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, leave the politics out of this. Of course, that won't happen because Democrats see an opportunity to hit on the Trump team over this. But you're not going to really get to the bottom of what was going on or potentially fix it if you just use it for political fodder. But, of course, I have no expectation that anyone would do otherwise, unfortunately. But look, as you said, Brian, I mean, this is one that, again, a bit of a self-inflicted wound here. And it'll be the subject today of those hearings and the threat briefing. And tomorrow's threat briefing, I should say. And also, look, the DCIA was there, was on that text, and so was Tulsi Gabbard's representative. And so they were, in a sense, complicit just because they were on the text stream. And you wonder why they maybe didn't say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this on Signal. Like, I don't think anyone said that, or maybe they did, and they were overruled. Who knows? There's a lot to get to the bottom of. The challenge for us is we're doing this in public, and I kind of wish we weren't, because our adversaries are going to soak it up and use everything they can against us.
So let's talk about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. It just came across, as I mentioned, U.S. and Ukraine agreed to ensure safe navigation. That means the Black Sea. Let's not attack each other on the Black Sea. They agreed in principle not to attack each other's energy sources. They've been mutual accusations that they're still doing it. Your thoughts about how these peace talks are going?
Look, the war's been a loser for Vladimir Putin. He's losing.
Does he know that?
I'm sorry?
Does he know that?
Yeah, he knows that. He's the KGB operative in the Kremlin, so what he's trying to do is spew a lot of propaganda and disinformation and make us think that he's not losing. But if you just think about the hundreds of thousands of casualties that he's caused for his own army, which is decimated. Their most elite capable units have been chewed up in that meat grinder war, and Russia's only taken about 10% of the Ukrainian territory since the invasion. Their stocks of tanks and armored vehicles, artillery, also severely depleted. So part of the questioning is, are we going to allow ourselves to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? I mean, Vladimir Putin's objective was to topple Ukraine. He didn't do it. And so we shouldn't be acceding to his maximalist demands. We should be pressing him to ensure that he doesn't have the capability to launch an invasion down the road where he would finish the job, which is, I think, what he wants to do. He said publicly that, many times, Ukraine's not a real country, and that he's defending ethnic Russians. That's not an indication that he's super interested in the peace deal, and he hasn't agreed to the peace deal that Zelensky did, which was just a ceasefire. Putin refused to do that so far.
No, I agree with you. So they're going to do things incrementally back and forth.
Right.
And I wasn't too encouraged by Steve Witkoff's relatively conciliatory message that, well, there's Russian-speaking people in those in the Donbass region, so I don't think they were giving up that land yet. Just like there's Spanish-speaking people in Texas, I don't think we should give it back to what they think should be Mexico.
Right.
So kind of ridiculous. But as we look at what's happening in Ukraine, I want you to hear what Marco Rubio said. Cut 38.
First of all, I think the American people should be proud that we have a president that's promoting peace and the end of conflict on this planet. This is a war that's gone on for 3 years, as you pointed out, that, as you rightly pointed out, would have never happened had you been president, but now it's here, and it needs to be brought to an end. There is no military solution to this war. It has to end through negotiation.
So they're going to look to do this thing incrementally. So the only thing that would stop another invasion, I believe, is a promise that America would secure it or international forces on their land. And that's a non-starter with Russia. Sooner or later, we're going to get to those really tough decisions.
Yeah, I mean, too bad. Ukraine is an independent, sovereign country. If they want some French or British or other European troops in their country, that's okay for them to do that. And the other thing, I would just say, look, and I'm not saying this to spoil things. God bless the Trump administration for trying. But if I were advising the president, I'd say, please don't hitch your political wagon to the KGB guy in the Kremlin. Do your best to get a ceasefire, but remember that we're out for our own national security about what matters most. And remember that Putin has always considered the United States to be Russia's main enemy, Glavny Protivnik in Russian. And he wants to damage our global reputation, not enhance it as a global peace mediator. He wants to drive a wedge between us and our NATO partners, our allies. And ultimately, he'd like to induce us to accede to a bad deal for Ukraine. So those are things I think we just have to be very careful about. And I hope that Special Envoy Witkoff's got a Russia expert on his team who's served there for many years and can speak Russian to just interpret what is going on here, because it is extremely challenging dealing with Vladimir Putin. He's pulled the wool over the eyes of numerous presidents in the past, as I know you recall. So
as it's progressing right now, are you encouraged, discouraged? What do you think?
Look, I have to emphasize this point. All the wars I've seen close up and studied in history class, wars end when one side wins or both sides are too exhausted to fight. And we're not there yet. So we are trying to stop the conflict, and that's good for us, and it's good for the world. I just don't know if we're going to get there. I don't even know if it's possible to get there. I know we'll do the best that we can to get there, but that's where the president may have to step back like he did in Hanoi when he walked away from a bad deal with Kim Jong-un and just say, you know what? I tried, and I can't do it. We can't break these two apart. Sorry.
Yeah.
And he may have to do that.
And the thing is, I think Trump's got to show a willingness to walk away and to give Ukraine 100%. More weapons.
Yep, exactly. Just like he did in Hanoi, which was a brilliant move. He showed up. He said, I'm ready to talk about the North Korea's nuclear arsenal, and we're ready to do a deal, a fair deal, a good deal. And what the North Koreans were proposing was bad for the United States, bad for our national security, and the president packed up his stuff, took his people home. And he was lauded for that because it was the right decision for our country.
Do you think there's a chance that Putin understands that the upside of having normalized relations with us is enough of an enticement to allow those international troops on the ground to back out and stop this war? Do you think he sees himself, you know what? I'm looking at this private communication. There really is a rift with the West. We don't like that, but he does. You think he's like, they really do want to de-emphasize and let these guys fight on their own? You know, I know Trump, and there's an excellent chance he really believes this, and he took a lot of crap in America because of it, even from his own party, and might think to himself it's in his best interest to do this deal. I'm not saying that he'd ever do it for us, but would he do it for? Does it ever? If you're him and you put yourself in that person's spot all the time for a living, do you think that?
Brian? Yep, that's the key thing, is to see the world through Putin's eyes. So what you just asked is what President Trump should be asking Director of CIA Ratcliffe. What's it going to take for Vladimir Putin to actually agree to a deal? Now, look, Putin doesn't care about the hundreds of thousands of casualties he's caused. They don't threaten his regime. It's just a statistic to him. And Ukraine is an existential threat, not because Ukraine poses a military threat to Russia, because they're a democracy and they're trying to build relations, commercial, diplomatic, and strategic relations with Europe and the West, and he could never allow that to happen. And again, that's why his strategic objective was to overthrow the government of Ukraine. So I don't know if he's going to want to agree to a deal. His allies are Iran and North Korea and China, and he's happy to enjoy that partnership for all that it entails in lieu of a real partnership with the West, the United States and Europe, which he knew he was going to blow it up when he invaded Ukraine and give up the commercial relationships that he enjoyed that were very lucrative for his hydrocarbon exports. Well, he doesn't have that anymore, but he's okay with that because he wants to be aligned with this axis of dictatorships, which is what we've got. And I still feel like the best way to break that relationship is to defeat Putin in Ukraine, make it clear that his imperial land grab was a loser, and that maybe that might drive a wedge between Putin and those evil, despotic regimes with which he's allied.
I think Ukraine still wants to fight. I mean, they're the ones who, they keep saying they want to keep fighting, but they understand that that's not going to really resonate with the West. But think about it. Vladimir Putin got his worst nightmare. He got two formidable countries now joining NATO, and now he's got $300, if not more, $1 billion frozen in the West. So that's another incentive for Trump, isn't it?
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, if your country's invaded the way Ukraine was invaded, and Russia's kidnapped tens of thousands of Ukrainian children and mounted countless indiscriminate bombing attacks which have killed Ukrainians in their homes and hospitals, neighborhoods, and maternity wards, you're going to fight. I know you and I would, Brian. We'd pick up a automatic rifle and we'd go to the front and we'd fight for our country because that's what you do. In fact, if you're wondering about whether Ukraine is a sovereign nation or not, or whether they'd be okay being taken over by Russia, there's your answer. I mean, that's it. And so God bless them for fighting back and showing the world that, the stronger nuclear power doesn't just get to take over weaker countries the way Putin tried.
It looks like, real quick, we have a minute left, but it looks like that the IDF is going to look to destroy Hamas, not just weaken Hamas. Will they be successful?
Yep. That was the objective that Prime Minister Netanyahu laid out when the war began, destroy Hamas. So if you're looking at a post-conflict reconstruction plan for Gaza, it cannot include Hamas. If it does, you've got a counterinsurgency you've got to deal with. So they are destroying Hamas. They're picking apart Hamas leaders and their battalions, and it's a long fight. But look, there's no future for Gaza or the Palestinians with Hamas still in existence.
Daniel Hoffman, thanks so much, Dan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Brian.
There's been a lot of breaches. There's been a lot of leaks. There's been a lot of stolen, cases of stolen documents. I've never seen a large group of senior-most national security officials just kind of willy-nilly put out a bunch of stuff, without knowing who they're talking to.
So that's Jeff Goldberg talking about what it was like to be in that text chain. We know this story by now on Signal, which is an encrypted app, which all the high-ranking intelligence people were communicating about the Houthi attacks 2 weeks ago. What that means in the big picture, they got to reform it, they got to fix it, but no one's getting fired. Donald Trump made that clear this with me, and he just made it formally a statement about 9:30 today. Evidently, they did put something out in February saying that this was a dangerous app, that somehow the Chinese and Russians would be able to use it. Whether there were actually detailed attack plans in it, I don't know. Jeff Goldberg said he left it out when he wrote his story because he thought it wasn't in the best interest of the country's national security. Sean Davis joins us now, and we're just looking at some of the fireworks that are taking place now between Senator Bennett, obviously frustrated that his party's going nowhere, and John Radcliffe. Sean Davis, welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me, sir.
As CEO and co-founder of the Federalist, you're all over conservative causes in some of these intelligence challenges. Obviously, a mistake was made with this signal intelligence, and very fortuitous for Democrats to have this the day of this intelligence conference, committee meetings, right?
Yeah, it is. It was definitely a mess up. Personally, I'm not as bothered by the fact they were communicating on Signal that had been approved, as Ratcliffe said about the CIA. I'm a lot more concerned about who added this person, who added Goldberg, how that happened. I don't particularly think classified information was shared. In fact, there's one exchange which Goldberg himself reported where Hegseth says, hey, on this topic, go check the high side, referring to the classified network. So they clearly were keeping classified information on the classified network. But I think the big issue here, at least in my opinion, is not, oh, they were using Signal, that's crazy. It's how on earth was Goldberg added, who did it, and how are they going to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. That certainly would help. But now we got to go back and forth on this, and we'll see where it goes. Hopefully people learn from it. The other thing that's pretty clear is that J.D. Vance was not on board with this strike, and the anti-European attitude was not just the context of a speech. He really feels as though Europe has been on for the ride, and they're not paying their fair share. Your thoughts about that interaction?
Yeah, I actually thought it was really interesting. Now, I've never been at a high level like Vance was, but I worked in Congress. I worked on the Hill. I've been in conversations with senators. There are things you discuss in private in a very open and honest way to help make sure that you are serving your principal in the best way possible, to make sure everything you're doing is aligned with the principal's message and vision, in this case, Donald Trump. So when I see people talking openly that way in private about how to align stuff, my first reaction wasn't, oh, wow, JD's not on the team. It was, hey, there's a lot of disagreement internally, and they're all trying to figure out the best way to handle that.
Right. I like that Stephen Miller shut it down and said, we're not going back to the president. He greenlit this. So enough.
Yeah, exactly. But that you have to be able to have those kind of open conversations at the staff level. You need to be able to hash stuff out. Because what you were seeing there was people saying, hey, these are going to be some of the concerns that pop up. How do we handle that? How do we deal with that? That's stuff that you have to do at the staff level. And the idea that everyone, when they're having these discussions on execution, is going to be just like happily skipping along and holding hands, and that's just not how things work.
Here's what Senator John Hoeven said, Republican from North Dakota, cut 6.
I haven't seen the specific information yet, but I'll take a look at it. But, you know, Marco Rubio, headed up the Intelligence Committee, he's a sharp guy. So I'm not sure what happened here. but I'll sure take a look and see. But as far as going after the Houthis and taking a strong position in the Middle East, we need to do that. We're doing the right thing there. The idea that they'd shut down shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf, that's ridiculous. And
that's what I think. And that's what I think the point was. Is that, well, J.D. Vance says, hey, only 3% of our commerce goes through there. Well, they shot at our destroyer that went through there over 70 times. We're using missiles to knock down drones, which we shouldn't really do. It's not cost protective. Ultimately, we'll have to leave because we can't protect ourselves anymore. That's disrespect towards the superpower that is, and shows that Russia and China could go through without any problem. So I have no problem with this operation, especially because they went after people and not just empty launchers.
That's true. You can't allow hostile forces to go harass shipping lanes, whether you're there for 1% of it or 100% of it. You look at how Thomas Jefferson handled the pirates early in America's history. You can't have any tolerance for it. What I kind of was looking at in that particular conversation wasn't so much, hey, we're going to do this or not do it. It was more like hey, this is a much bigger problem for Europe than it is for us. Why are we shouldering the entire burden? Maybe we should be looking for ways to make them foot the cost. We'll execute it, but we shouldn't be doing this for free. And I think that's totally appropriate.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what they were saying. Here's John Radcliffe explaining the whole thing about a half hour ago.
Dr. Radcliffe, were you on the group chat?
Senator, I was on a signal messaging group.
So you were the John Radcliffe on that chat?
I was.
Thank you.
Can I provide some context, Senator, to that?
Yes, but I've got a series of questions.
Well, but I think it's important because at the outset you made a couple of comments about signal messaging using encrypted apps. So that we're clear, one of the first things that happened when I was confirmed as CIA director was signal was loaded onto my computer at the CIA, as it is for most CIA officers. One of the things that I was briefed on very early, Senator, was by the CIA records management folks about the use of signal as a permissible work use. It is. That is a practice that preceded the current administration to the Biden administration.
Director Radcliffe, I've got a series of questions. If you're making the statement, the statement, the signal is a secure channel.
No, can I answer that? It is.
I've got a series of
decryption. So to finish,
I understand encryption.
It is permissible to use to communicate and coordinate for work purposes, provided, Senator, that any decisions that are made are also recorded through formal channels. Right. So those were procedures that were implemented. My staff implemented those processes, followed those processes, complied with those processes, and finally, just please. So my communications, to be clear, in a signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, we will.
So you try to explain it. It wasn't as when you originally hear it, you don't realize that signal was being used so effective or so willingly in the last administration into this one.
Right. And it's easy to look at that and say, oh, they're using an app. We can't be using apps. But the issue here was not a technological flaw in the app. It was a poor execution of the process by a human involved in it. If I invite someone into my house and they have a bug on them and they're recording conversations with me, that's not a breach of my door locks. It doesn't mean the alarm doesn't work. It just means that a person was allowed in kind of through deception or incompetence. That's the problem here. They had a human problem here. They did not have a technological problem.
So, Sean, as we look at the President of the United States now, he is trying to cut costs and get a budget passed. At the same time, get out of the court system with his initiatives, the executive orders, and he's in front of a three-point person panel this week in order to appeal a verdict that was handed by a single judge, a district judge, that said he could not ship 261 people to a supermax prison who happen to be illegal alien criminals. How do you see this playing out?
So I think it's important to step back and kind of look at what Trump struggled with in his first administration, which was a total obstruction from the administrative state, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. So he comes in day one in Trump 2.0 and understands what he's facing and immediately goes to work neutering this completely unelected, all-powerful administrative state. So he's not going to have that challenge this time around. What he's facing now is what's effectively a judicial coup from the judiciary, where you have single inferior court district judges taking for themselves not just the power of the presidency, they're taking for themselves powers of superior court, of the Supreme Court. And an example I'll give you is that there's no one member of the United States Supreme Court, not even Chief Justice John Roberts, who has the power unilaterally to block anything. They have to do everything together. They have to have a majority. And yet what we have right now is a single district judge in D.C., elected by no one, saying, hey, Mr. President, you can't do this because I've decided you can't. And that's a total abomination and total disrespect, not just for the president, but for the American people who elected him.
So what happens next? They're trying to get some type of legislation to disempower but not impeach this guy.
Yeah, so Congress can do a bunch of stuff. They can change districts around. They can remove jurisdiction. But the most powerful check you have, either from Congress or the president, is the fact that the judiciary and all its rulings really only survive with respect to Congress or the presidency based on their own deference.
Yep.
The judiciary doesn't control money. It doesn't control the military. What you have to have is a trust from either the executive or legislative branch to defer to you. And I think we're rapidly reaching the point where the president may just stop deferring to them and saying, you're infringing on my powers. The Constitution gives to me, and I'm obligated to abide by the Constitution.
All right. Thanks so much, Sean Davis. Always great to talk to you. Appreciate it, especially riding with the breaking news.
Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not. Are you denying? Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat.
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat.
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because
Council.
it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
As the White House previously
Is it classified or non-classified information on this text?
I can confirm.
So that is some of the sparring with Senator Warner, as well as Tulsi Gabbard, on the signal intelligence communication leading up to the Houthi and after the Houthi attack. Senator Cassidy, I want to talk about education. Just going to get you to weigh in on this. You have so much experience in Washington. I did not know the Signal app was even used in the prior administration, let alone this one. Your thoughts?
Yeah, first, the Signal app doesn't surprise me because the Chinese have been very active at trying to go after text messages between government officials. And the fact that they're using Signal is another layer of protection against something that the Chinese have been attempting to do. Let me first say that. But, Brian, just more broadly, they made a mistake. The president has acknowledged that. You can be sure it won't happen again. And the president has said, people are entitled to a mistake. I'll point out no Americans died. That was different than Afghanistan, where, Joe Biden got fired in part because Americans were dying when he withdrew so poorly from Afghanistan. It's a mistake. They'll get over it, and they'll be better after it.
Yeah, so we'll see. This fireworks today, the timing's interesting, right when you have an Intel conference. But having said that, hopefully they'll get through it and understand it, and they're just standing up now. All right, let's talk about the dissolving of the Education Department. You are chairman of the Senate Education Committee. Are you against it or for it?
I am for it. President Reagan talked about this in 1980. And so to see a President Trump take it on and attempt to execute, which will require my help and the help of the Senate Republicans to get it done, is kind of a realization of that which Republicans have understood needed to be done for some time.
So how is it going to happen? And do you think obviously legislation is going to be needed? What are you going to do?
First, I'm speaking with Secretary McMahon, and how do we come up with something? They'll have to deliver something to us, and then we will work to make it happen. First thing you have to do is relieve anxiety. Secretary McMahon made it clear when she was in her confirmation hearings, this is not about decreasing federal funding.
Right.
It's about returning control to the parents and the local school district. And the fundamental question is, who has the child's interest more at heart? The mom, the dad, the local school board, or a Washington, D.C. bureaucrat? And this is about giving control to mom and give control to dad.
So now the teachers union, school districts are suing President Trump's administration over the dismantling of the education department. Not unexpected that the American Federation of Teachers and its Massachusetts chapter joined the East Hampton School District, the Somerville Public School Committee, in challenging this executive order.
Yeah, so if you way back when Jimmy Carter set this up, he put the stakeholders, the vested interest in public education, who are more about their vested interest than they are about the child. He gave them an inordinate amount of influence over the Department of Education. And you saw this during the COVID lockdown, when clearly it was safe for people to go back to the classroom, and teachers unions weighed in to keep kids locked out. Now, this should be more about the child, not about a D.C. bureaucrat. We need to put the parent centerpiece into the education of their child. And by the way, is the parent going to have more influence over a local school board or over a Washington, D.C. bureaucrat? Clearly, it's the local school board. Let's give power to the parent. Let's give mom the power.
What about special education? Who's going to take care of that?
She made it clear that funding will not be decreased for the special ed programs.
Who's going to do it?
It will be local school boards, but there will still be accountability required of the federal government. The federal taxpayer is not going to want his or her tax dollars going someplace and being used to do something which is inappropriate.
Understood.
So there will still be accountability measures. We can do it a lot better than we're doing now.
Pell Grant, student loans, things like that, is that going to Treasury?
So right now, the president has moved some of the student loan activity to the Small Business Administration, and they do a lot of loans. They've got a lot of expertise. I will point out that the Department of Education under Biden covered itself with shame in terms of how they managed that program, costing the federal taxpayer hundreds of billions of dollars, and frankly, the kids who had to pay it back too. So we can do this a lot better, and I think a new approach is called for.
Senator Cassidy, do you think that maybe cutting the interest rate on these student loans rather than randomly forgiving these loans and defying the Supreme Court is an option you could do?
Well, yes, but I'll tell you, there's already so many programs out there to help somebody, for example, who loses their job to get forbearance on paying it back. And when the Biden administration was just kind of coming up with a let's forgive everything as if it had to be done to rescue people, they were ignoring that which is already out there. More fundamentally, we need to address the high cost of education so the kids don't get in this situation to begin with, and that's the place to begin.
Interesting. So how do you plan on judging if there's improvement, if everyone wants to get away from teaching to the test? How are you going to judge if anyone's learning anything?
Well, first, we can acknowledge that we started off in 1979 when it was nationalized, if you will. I think like in the top 5 internationally in terms of the performance of our kids. And now we're like, way below that. So there has been a decline over the period of time in which we have nationalized the regulation of education. Now, it's not overnight, but as a rule, I would ask, who cares more about a child's education? The parent, particularly the mom, or some D.C. bureaucrat? We can expect improvement.
And the teachers are great. We just got to give the great teachers more money. Senator Bill Cassidy, I'm glad you're in charge. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Back in a moment. Keep in mind, BrianKilmeade.com. Find out how to see me in Dayton, June 21st, History, Liberty, and Laugh.